episode 2 of Hawai'i Football Now, diving into the first win of the 2021 season for the University of Hawaii football and a lot more. Jordan back with Hunter. And Hunter, let's dive right into the opening drive here. Some opening impressions, some first impressions, if you will. Let's start sort of at the venue, right? We talked at length about it last week in our opening episode, the fact that Hawaii was playing really their first ever true home game on campus in Mānoa, albeit with no fans. I got a chance to attend part of the Spectrum broadcast crew doing some of the pre and the post game, and I'll kind of give you my perspective on that. But viewing it sort of on television through the video screen, if you will, what'd you make of that?
I mean, just incredibly special. Again, it was. I'd give it a 9 out of 10, maybe an 8.5 even, because there's nothing like a home game in Hawaii. And to have a home game on our campus for the first time in our program's history, but without fans, it was like we had all the best intentions, but weren't able to complete the story, if you will. So, a lot of really cool things that I observed. Just as a former player, getting to come out of our locker room, not out of one in Aloha Stadium, which we always just share with other people. We have to bring all of our stuff to Aloha Stadium to make it feel like our locker room. This time, of course, with it being on campus, you get to, as a player, you get to get dressed in your locker. You get to get prepared in your space. And you get to take the field in the place that you know more than anybody else. And so, as much as Aloha Stadium has been our home for so long, it was always a thing to get acclimated to whenever you went and played there, because you weren't there every day, where a lot of these programs do get to practice on their game field. So that's a new thing for us, for Hawaii. And then too, just a couple of really cool things, like the honoring of Robert Kekaula on the field, one of our late great broadcasters down there. It was a really special weekend for the Rainbow Warriors, and I'm thankful we got that dub.
Yeah, without a doubt, right? And yeah, I just kind of wanted to follow up on a couple of those things, Hunter, because I think that maybe gets overlooked a little bit in the past, right? Whether you were catching a plane or playing at Aloha, like you had to get on a bus at the very
Yes.
least to play a home game, right? In the past, as awesome as Aloha Stadium is, as great as the crowds have been over the decades there, what difference does that make, right? The fact, as you mentioned, you don't have to literally pack up everything from your locker, bus, the 20 minutes or so sometimes in traffic that it takes to get to Aloha Stadium from campus, and just going through all of that, not having to worry about any of that. Heck, if you live on campus, all you got to do is walk down to your locker and walk out to the field after you get dressed. And then the other thought that you brought up, being able to practice on your game field quite regularly. It's not like they were practicing at Aloha Stadium. I know that you get some of your scrimmages in there, some of your spring stuff there, and periodically throughout the season. But how big a difference is that, you think?
I think it's massive. I would love to pick the brain of some of the guys. I don't know exactly what their weekend itinerary was. Typically for us, when we were on the team, coach liked to take us down to a hotel, typically in Waikiki. If not one night before the game, sometimes even 2 nights if it was a big game, to kind of keep the team together and separated from the rest of the world, to really get everybody focused. And then, of course, yeah, we would jump on a bus, and we all felt like rock stars when we got a police escort to Aloha Stadium to alleviate some of that traffic, which I'm not going to lie was pretty cool. But again, with just the short drive from Waikiki up into Manoa, that's going to feel a little bit different. Some of the famous traditions of Aloha Stadium, like getting off the bus and walking through the band tunnel. Again, we have to throw everything out with COVID right now. Everything is going to look different. It's going to be a couple years for Hawaii to hit their stride with being on campus again. But as a player, it's really, really cool. when you play on your practice facility, or you practice where you're going to play your home games, I should say, you have a greater understanding of the elements, as well as what to expect there. Um, with it being an outdoor stadium, you really have to understand what the wind is doing. In Manoa, there's nothing stopping a shower happening every 5 minutes. Um, as a quarterback, that's definitely something we think about. The footballs getting wet, the wind hitting you in the face. I mean, from the perspective of a player down on that field, you always have wind coming straight down the valley. So kind of the northeast side of that, the way that field is situated, down towards the water, you can expect those things as a player. Whereas, if you're an away opponent, you have to adjust to some of those things on the fly. So I know, as when we would practice on that field, as a quarterback, we loved being able to throw west because we had the wind with us. So little things like that, that when you get to play on your home turf, mean all the world.
Yeah, I love learning about that kind of stuff, right? All these little details that sort of factor in. And you're right, right? We don't know exactly what that full game day experience is going to be like until a
Exactly.
lot of these COVID restrictions are lifted or at least relaxed a little bit. And that was the big prevailing thing, right? The fact that this first home game, historic home game on campus, there weren't any fans. But I can tell you, being there in person, it was even nicer than I expected. I tip my
Mhm.
cap to everybody from David Matlin to the folks at the state government throughout the University of Hawaii system, that they got that thing constructed in the amount of time that it took, on kind of short notice. And
Oh,
and it's got a lot of potential, and the field
yes.
is great. The stands are right there, especially in the end zone. I mean, they're not even 10 yards out the back of the end zone. You fill that thing with students, you fill that thing with rowdy fans, and you're going to have quite the game day
Sure.
atmosphere. I think you're going to have quite the home field advantage, and I think it's going
Oh,
to be pretty cool. And look, it's a far cry from 50,000 people sold out. Don't get me wrong, but it is so intimate and it has a feel, right? And there was a lot of talk of hey, what was the move to do, right? Was it finding a temporary high school facility on Oahu? I live on Maui, and there was a lot of buzz here. Hey, the next best thing is War Memorial Stadium in Wailuku, right? Or at least the next biggest capacity stadium sitting there at War Memorial.
mm,
But being there, being on campus when that thing kicked off, it felt right, man. I got to tell you, right? As much as I would love if those games were here, I could just drive to the games if it was on Maui. But as much as, Vegas was thrown out, right? Hey, well, I'm going to just go play all the games, take the show on the road, go play them all in Vegas. It felt right. There was something about it where it's like, look, football games belong here. The university, that was a home that they could truly call their own, right? There was no disputing. As much as Aloha Stadium, the history there, it was always shared, right? Whether it was the Pro Bowl, whether it was Michael Jackson concerts, whether it
at
was,
the high
the
school.
Hawaii Bowl, high school games, right? That's a great point. Some of the
Yeah.
prep football history. And there's nothing wrong with that. But to have some place where it's like, no, no, this belongs to the University of Hawaii football team. I don't know if I anticipated that being so strong, that feeling, that ownership being so strong. And I can only imagine how much that would be heightened once we get some fans in there.
Totally. I mean, I like a more intimate venue, uh, especially looking at the program, in the last 6 to 7 years. We had a hard time filling Aloha Stadium to its capacity. Even some of our best winning seasons, when this Cole McDonald's second year, when we went, I think we went 10-4, 10-5, something like that. Um, Phenomenal season, and yet looking around in that stadium, and we can only pull in maybe 18,000. Um, it was disheartening as a former player. Everyone says, "Oh, if our team was better, we would fill that stadium." It just wasn't the case. We were great. We shared a Mountain West title that season. Um, Having an intimate venue, I think, is closer to the ohana spirit of Hawaii. And again, it's not going to be the case with COVID. We can't go elbows to elbows with our neighbor right now. But when we get through this, I think that's closer to the DNA of our school, our island, this state. is to have a more intimate venue. I'm a fan of that. And just from a former player's perspective, Jordan, that turf needed to be replaced the year it went in. Let me just put it that way. So I have wanted to go out on the new turf selfishly just to see how much better it is. It looks beautiful. Um, the old turf, we would find screws out there when we were in practice, um, all kinds of stuff out there. So, man, it looked gorgeous. Man, I speak for all former players. We are so jealous of those guys. It's a really cool thing to get to play on campus.
Yeah, the field is quite nice. You'll love it when you go ahead and walk out there. I've heard some of those horror stories, if you will, of some of
Yeah,
the old turf there before it became, NCAA regulation in terms of hosting games. Yeah, at the very least, when that place gets filled, it's going to be the diehards, right? It is going to be a hot ticket in town, I think, once they open that up to the general public. All right, let's transition into that first game, and it was a triumphant debut, albeit a bit of a roller coaster of a game against Portland State. A 49-35 victory over the FCS Vikings. Hawaii led it 28-0 after the first quarter, and then outscored 35-21 over the final three quarters for that final 14-point margin. Put up a lot of points, gave up a lot of points, particularly in that second half after leading at 35-7 at the break. They outrushed Portland State. Were strong on the ground. We'll get into some of those performances, particularly Day Hunter outgained them overall offensively. Portland State did end up throwing for 400 yards. Davis Alexander, a lot of that sort of playing catch up, but he was impressive with a deep core of receivers. But for this University of Hawaii team, we mentioned started fast, TDs on their first four possessions, opening drive, 11 plays, 75 yards, took over nearly 4.5 minutes off the clock. Their second drive, 8 plays, 84 yards. And you love to see that, right?
yeah,
Being able to march the ball down the field. And it ended up both with touchdowns. That really set the tone early. And then they were able to kind of race out to the halftime lead. It kind of got a little dicey after that. But what struck you, Hunter, especially that fast start offensively for a team that was looking to get back on the right foot on that side of the football following the tough loss at UCLA the week prior?
yeah. I think that the stats and what our offense was able to do. Again, I want to talk about the first half first. Is that we're able to score points. We have a really, really talented wide receiver core. I thought we spread the ball out really well to all of our guys, and we had three guys almost eclipse 100 yards. And anytime you can have three receivers get close to that mark, you're doing pretty well in the air. I was really impressed with that. I thought Shevin looked really good. Obviously, aside from the one interception, one is always too many when you're a quarterback, but I thought he did a really good job getting through his reads, getting through his progressions, and coming off of week one when we really struggled offensively to get anything going on the offensive side, to get some points on the board and prove, no, we can make plays. That last year was not a fluke in making plays as an offense, and as a team, you can really start to build off of that. And it's always easier on your defense when your offense is scoring points. It's what a team is supposed to do. It's funny when an offense is scoring really well, the rest of the team can kind of get relaxed. Whereas when a defense is doing really good, it can fire the team up. It's a really mysterious thing as a player. But I've really noticed that through the years is offenses kind of keep everybody relaxed. Defenses stoke the fire. And so that were just some takeaways from that first half. And of course, Day Hunter had a huge day. He got to break the rock after the game, which is a tradition that Coach Graham obviously brought into the program. Great day from him.
Yeah, it really was. And you mentioned, right, Hunter, the three guys nearly going over the century mark, plus Day Hunter's 128 yards on the ground. And that's kind of the balance that I think Coach Graham has been looking for in his run and gun offense. Nick Marner, 4 catches, 97 yards, and the touchdown, the first ever at Ching Athletics Complex. So make sure you make a little note of that for the trivia question down the road. Who scored the first ever touchdown in Hawaii's first home game on campus. Jared Smart, who I thought they made a little more concerted effort to get him the ball after a quiet week 0, I should say, against UCLA. 4 catches, 96 yards, a touchdown. Aaron Cephas, just a couple of catches, less than 10 yards, but he had that big touchdown late in the second quarter to kind of push the lead back out to 28 before the break. And then we talked about Day Hunter, 16 carries, 128 yards on the ground, plus the touchdown. Dedrick Parsons, 38 yards rushing on 11 carries, but he's kind of turned into their goal line back, if you will, their red zone back, gives them some tough yardage. A guy out of Philadelphia, the Howard transfer, coming in. What kind of impressed you about the running game? They were pretty much held in check. Chevan Cordero was basically the run game again in week 0, like we saw it oftentimes in year 1. But Hunter and Parsons, kind of a nice little two-headed monster that Hawaii can turn to. Hunter's very all-purpose. We have seen him catch a number of balls already in the first 2 weeks out of the backfield. But what Parsons has kind of turned into as this guy down, in tough yardage situations, they trust him a lot to go ahead and finish drives.
They do. And talking to some of the guys on the team, he's a horse. I mean, we give him the ball and have a lot of confidence in what he can do. Kind of between the tackles. You're exactly right. He's the style of running back, very north to south, not so much an east to west guy like a Calvin Turner, which one of the craziest runs I've seen in a long time. And of course, that made it to ESPN's top 10 that night for that crazy run where he went to one side of the field and then flipped it. And anytime you can flip it Reggie Bush style at the Division I level, you've got some wheels to turn the corner on literally everyone out there. Crazy impressive there. But, I mean, Jordan, we talked about it last week. What was the one unit that we wanted to see the most improvement from, other than maybe some things on the defense? It was our offensive line. I think our boys came out in 8. The only way that you're going to get anything done on the ground is if the offensive line is nailing their assignments and really getting that push up front. And at least from the first half's perspective, you could tell that we wanted it. You could tell that we were hungry to flip the scripts on what happened against UCLA, and this is our place. Let's go out and do what we know what we can do. And before the season started, our offensive line was arguably one of our strongest units in terms of what we could expect from them this season. So I think that that's very characteristic of what we're going to continue to see from them. And anytime that you can get those numbers, both passing and rushing, you're going to put up points. It's just the way that it goes with this game. So very impressed with how the guys did up front.
Yeah. I'm glad you bring up Calvin Turner, right? He had 144 all-purpose yards. He had that insane rushing touchdown, 36 yards on the ground, another 5 catches, 82 yards. He's basically had 5 catches in each of the first 2 games, but he also put the ball on the ground a lot, and not necessarily fumbling the ball on offense, but several drops on passes that were very catchable. And then he muffed a couple of punts, one that was bouncing back to him, and then the kickoff that basically went between his legs and then was subsequently recovered in the end zone by Portland State for another touchdown that made the game a little closer than I think a lot of people were hoping for in the second half. If his bad game is 144 all-purpose yards, a Sports Center type touchdown, and what he is doing all over the field, that's pretty impressive, and I think says a lot about him. But is there any concern with the mixed bag from Calvin there? We haven't seen a ton of that over the course of his UH career. I think a lot of people will hope to say, look, everybody has a bad game, right? First game under the lights at that venue as well. I don't know if that factored in. But I think he self-admittedly will tell you, right, they got to clean up some of those mistakes.
Absolutely. Yeah, when I look at our game against Portland State, first and foremost, a win is a win. Any chance you can get a 1 in the first column of your record, it's a good day in my book. The coaches will always say we got things to work on. We're not satisfied. We're going to continue to get better. I think Calvin Turner being one of the leaders, definitely one of the most exceptional players on our offense, that's not good enough for him. He would say that. I really think he would. He would expect more from himself, and it does speak to the level of player that he is, that despite some of those muffs, if you will, still was able to generate the kind of numbers that he did. And Jordan, just speaking frankly, a lot of times when we play, um, FCS schools like Portland State that come in, and I warned against this last week. Uh, it can kind of lead to us getting a little complacent and not being as locked in as what we might be, say, if Fresno State came to our house, or um, a Utah State, someone that we have to be at our best if we're going to beat them at home. And not only with what happened with Calvin, but certainly what happened with our defense in the second half. Um, we definitely kind of started to snooze a little bit, in my opinion. When if you look at a game like the Alabama Miami game, it felt like they kept their foot on the throat pretty much the whole game. And that's just the difference between teams that win championships and those that don't. So we definitely have a lot to work on.
Yeah, we can get into some of that, right? The defense, conversely, I thought played pretty well, right? Especially in that first half, just
Yep.
7 points allowed, forced 4 turnovers total in the game,
Hmm.
2 interceptions, 2 fumbles. Kai Kaneshiro and Justice Savai sort of shared the lead in terms of tackles, 6 each. Kaneshiro had that big pass breakup down near the goal line late in the or midway through the fourth quarter. So as Portland State was creeping further and further back into that ball game, thought the defensive line played pretty well. Dewan Matthews, 2 total tackles for loss, including a sack. Ote Baker had a sack as well. We saw some of the depth on that defensive line shown through with Pita Tonga's interception. Guys like Alema Kapoy, Ezra Ibai Malu, Justice Defy. We mentioned Jonah Laulu really sort of rotating in there and playing pretty well. Well, what was sort of your takeaway from the defensive side of the ball, Hunter?
Yeah, anytime that you can win the turnover ratio, which I think we might have just won it. I'm looking at it right now. Um, the stats are pretty staggering. Your team is going to win, even though Calvin obviously had a couple, but anytime that you can make some plays happen for your offense from a defensive side, it's just awesome. And the tides of momentum change drastically whenever you are able to make those things happen. Um, Felt like we had juice. I brought that up earlier with the offensive line. Our defensive unit, definitely in the first half, we were ready and we were hungry, and you could tell by the aggression, by the speed, by um, by the effort from the front, and with Justice Divide coming up with 6 tackles, it shows how well our defensive line did this week. Which, of course, that was the other unit we wanted to see some improvement of, and we really. We really kept them. I mean, they only rushed for 77 yards for the whole game. I think they're a little bit more of a passing first team, but at the same time, I got to give our guys credit. They did not move the ball very well on the ground against us. It was definitely a little bit more in the air in that second half from them.
Yeah, 400 yards ended up being the total through the air. Davis Alexander, very athletic quarterback. They got a pretty deep receiving core. Bo Kelly was really impressive out of the slot for the
Yeah.
Vikings. 6 catches, 132 yards, a touchdown. He averaged 22 yards of reception. Darian Chase, the transfer, he's from the Portland area, just north of the Washington border there in Vancouver. Started off in Nebraska, transfers back home basically to play for Portland State. He had 6 catches, 105 yards. That's basically over 17 yards a catch. Nate Bennett, big, tall receiver, big target. He had 5 catches, 95 yards, about 19 yards of reception. And Matayo Talalemotu, who was one of their big returning receivers, he had that lone first half touchdown for
Mm.
Portland State, 2 catches, 59 yards, 29 and a half yards per catch. And that obviously was his last involvement as he got hurt, basically a play after I think he scored that touchdown. And I bring up those numbers, something because I was kind of curious to ask you. We saw Hawaii, particularly after the first quarter, kind of mix in some of their cover zero looks, play man across the board, look to sort of increase their blitz packages with varying results. There were some times they were able to wreak havoc, and there were some times they gave us some big plays. They gave up some big plays in the passing game, and Portland State took advantage of that a little bit to get back in the ball game. And we know that Todd Graham likes to play that aggressive attacking style of defense. And it comes with some risk reward, right? And we saw some of that reward, and we saw some of the downside of it. while giving up some of those big plays. Is that something that you think the coaching staff was, hey, look, we're going to need to rely on some of this later in the season. Let's work on it. Or what was sort of your thought on seeing some of those packages, and the one, I think, glaring spot, at least defensively, for a team, as we mentioned, that played decently well overall, giving up the big pass play.
Yeah, I mean, anytime that you give up 400 yards in the air, you're going to be lucky to secure a win. That's just the way it goes. We talked about it last week. Their quarterback, Davis Alexander, he's a returning senior quarterback, isn't he?
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of experience there, a lot of maturity there. And yeah, like it makes sense that when they showed some of those cover zero looks at the beginning, maybe they weren't ready for it. But it only takes a couple powwows with your offensive coordinator, your coaching as a quarterback, to know when those things are coming and then start to look to hit your guys. And I mean, I'm looking at their stat line too. They had 3 guys as well, almost at the century mark, very nearly almost did it. And it just speaks to I want to give him credit, that quarterback, because that doesn't happen by accident. But then it also shows definitely a huge glaring part for me on a defensive minded coach, that we need to tighten those screws immensely, because we cannot give up 400 yards in the air and expect to win at all in the Mountain West. The Mountain West has always been a little bit more passing than running. And if we expect to do well in conference play, we have got to correct that, because that cannot be acceptable for us.
Yeah, any final thoughts, Hunter, as we sort of put a bow on Portland State? Hawaii continues their Oregon portion of the schedule, if you will, with a trip to Corvallis coming up this week. We'll talk about that after the break. But any final thoughts after this win, a historic win, first game on campus, picked up the first win of 2021. But any final comments on the Portland State victory?
I think we as Hawaii fans can be a little nitpicky when it comes to anything less than perfect on any facet of the football. I think we need to focus on it being a win, it being a great response to week 0 against UCLA. And sure, there's always going to be things to improve upon, but I think the wins obviously far outweigh the losses in this game against Portland State. And I'm excited to see what we have this week against Oregon State.
Yeah, so of course that moves them to 1-1 on the season. We'll step away. We'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll dive into that matchup with the Beavers out of the Pac-12.
This is Hawai'i Football Now from ESPN Honolulu.
All right, Hunter, we look ahead to this coming week's action. Hawaii back out on the road in sort of this alternating schedule every other week, right? Basically, the 2021 season. Road, home, road again. And this is the final game before they jump into Mountain West play the following week at home against San Jose State. Oregon State coming in 0-1. They opened their season with a loss in Indiana against Purdue, 30-21, losing to the Boilermakers. It was a game that was 23-21 with just under 3 minutes left. So they were right in that ball game against their opponent out of the Big Ten. Oregon State 2-5 last year in that abbreviated 2020 season. Hawaii, of course, playing host to Oregon State in 2019, defeating the Beavers 31-28 in that ball game. That was one of the exciting ones, right? A field goal midway through the fourth quarter. The difference in that one, Cole McDonald over 400 yards in the air, 4 touchdowns, all of them going to JoJo Ward. Jared Smart had 6 catches, 81 yards in that game. Corey Bethley, Cortez Davis, Eugene Ford all had big games defensively. Some of the characters that will be involved in this latest iteration of the rivalry with Oregon State. The Beavers 7-4 all-time against the University of Hawaii, 2-0 in Corvallis. This will be the third meeting, 2008, 2019, and now here in 2021. A lot of question marks for Jonathan Smith now in his 4th year. The former star quarterback there has been an assistant at a bunch of schools up there in the Northwest, Idaho, previously at the University of Washington under Chris Peterson, now in his 4th year at the alma mater. We don't know who's going to start at quarterback. They started Sam Neuer, who went 10 of 21 for under 100 yards and a pick. And then they brought in Chance Nolan in the 3rd quarter, provided a spark, went 10 of 16, 157 yards, led some scoring drives, didn't throw for a touchdown. Of course, returning quarterback we saw for a bunch last year, Tristan Gebbia, is still out with a hamstring injury, and all indications are he will still not be available come Saturday to make his season debut. So we don't know who's going to start at quarterback. We know they like to run the football. They've got a pretty veteran offensive line. But Hunter, it's another opportunity to play a Pac-12 opponent and another Pac-12 opponent on the road. You
Yep.
took part in some of those big games for the University of Hawaii, playing on the road in Power 5 environments. So what kind of opportunities does this present for Hawaii now at 1-1?
I think it's a rare opportunity for us to uh, snap it up against a Pac-12 school again within 2 weeks of, uh, from a player's perspective, kind of getting embarrassed against UCLA. Um, it gives us an opportunity. My good friend RJ Hollis and former teammate, he said it earlier today, that it's a chance to go beat up older brother. Which anytime we play a Pac-12 school, you kind of have to have that mindset. And yeah, just looking back to a couple years ago when they came here and we played them at Aloha Stadium. So much fun. We played really, really well against those guys. And just frankly speaking, we don't really like Oregon State a whole lot. There were some unique things that happened in the last few years, recruiting wise, from them, where they actually tried to lull one of our linebackers over to Oregon State while he was an active student athlete at University of Hawaii. I can remember Rolo showing that to us as players, and yeah, that sticks with us. And there are still a few guys on the team now that were on the team back then. And we don't forget about things like that, including the fact that a couple of those coaches that were coaches at Hawaii are now coaches at Oregon State. So, with that in mind, there's maybe not from the Coach Graham coaching staff, but in the tight knit group of players, that there's some motivation to go give it to the Beavers this Saturday beyond just trying to play a good football game. We do not like those guys. So that's a little bit of what I could expect from them going into Saturday.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up. Right there is a bit of history there, and you got to imagine on the other side for Oregon State, right there's a lot of guys who were part of that 2019 team that came here and lost, went back with a loss after their trip to Hawaii. They're going to be maybe looking for a little revenge in that sense. I'd imagine this could be a maybe not a testy affair or something like that, but there is some built-in motivation on both sides, without a doubt, for two teams that aren't in the same conference. It's pretty interesting for a Hawaii team as they look at this Oregon State squad, right? It is an 11-point spread as of now, as we record this on a Tuesday afternoon. Oregon State favored by 11 at home against the University of Hawaii, total 64, expecting a decently high-scoring affair. And
Yeah.
so I would imagine, a lot of the successful Hawaii teams in the past have been able to compete very favorably against what you would call, middle of the pack teams out of some of these power conferences, particularly the Pac-12, right? And especially knowing what UCLA followed up the Hawaii win with, a beating of ranked LSU, and now the Bruins ranked. And so maybe putting the Hawaii loss in a little bit more perspective, seeing what Oregon State has been the last couple of years, opening season loss at Purdue, this would seem to be a much more favorable opponent for Hawaii to go up and spring an upset.
Absolutely. Especially with what you mentioned about Oregon State's quarterback drama right now. Their returning starter having a hamstring, and they're really not sure who their starter is going to be this week. Um, I can't speak for Coach Graham, but any defensive minded coach is licking their chops hearing about that. Any sort of insecurity that you can pick up on from a team, especially at the quarterback position, you love to hear that, because that means pressure. That means throwing a lot of different looks at this guy, probably stunting a little bit on the defensive line as well. I think we could expect this could to potentially, and I really hope I'm not forced to eat my words down the road. This could be a chance for us as our defense to have our strongest game this season so far. And I remember back in 2019 when we played Oregon State. We threw the ball beautifully. We moved the ball, probably top 5 games I've ever been at Aloha Stadium in terms of offensive production. It was just incredible, and I think we're going to need to do the same thing And similar to what we did this last week against Portland State on both sides in the air and on the ground, I would love to see the same thing against these guys. And why not? Well, why not? I think Oregon State looking at us, they're like, okay, we got beat in a close game against Purdue. Yeah, we're playing Hawaii. Let's move on to week 3 now. I can already just say that that is the way they're looking at us on the schedule, and so we got nothing to lose. Anytime that we go up against Big Brother, let's just see what we got and play with everything we have because we don't have anything to lose.
Yeah, it'll be a good measuring stick heading into the conference opener the following week, as we mentioned, against San Jose State. One last thought on this Oregon State matchup, Hunter. Of course, we encourage everybody to tune in to Bobby and John and listen to it on ESPN Honolulu, but it is a nationally televised game. FS1, 5 p.m. Hawaii time. It is 11 o'clock Eastern time, right? 8 o'clock there on the West Coast. And so these nationally televised games, as a player, do you take notice of that? Is that something you're fully aware of? The chance that, hey, look, we're playing in front of a national audience, we can make a little statement here, or is it, hey, you keep your head down and every game's the same?
I think a player at Hawaii absolutely takes notice because I got love for our friends over at our Deer Spectrum, speaking for yourself as well. But not everybody can afford to watch the games, especially those who have been recruited from different parts of the country. It's challenging for their family and their friends to watch them play. So anytime that you can kind of bridge the gap of the distance of playing in Hawaii, whenever you're on the road and get to be on a nationally televised game, you're licking your chops because your friends are watching, your family's watching, if you have a chance at the next level, scouts have a much easier time seeing you if you're on a nationally televised game. You try to approach every game the same way. You want to play well, play with greatness, no matter what the situation is. But definitely, absolutely, when you're playing a nationally televised game, there's a little there's a little thing that turns on the inside of you that says it's game time. Let's get going.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Again, 5 o'clock Hawaii time kickoff against Oregon State. You can hear it on ESPN Honolulu, of course. Hunter, kind of shifting our focus a little bit, looking at the out-of-town scoreboard, if you will. It was a bit of a mixed bag for the Mountain West this past weekend. First full slate of action, all 12 teams in action over the weekend, starting last week, Thursday. Of course, that thriller in Orlando, Boise State losing a tough one to Dylan Gabriel and UCF, a game that went late into the night after a weather delay. San Diego State kind of took care of business against New Mexico State. But then you had, about half the conference playing FCS opponents. You had Hawaii's win over Portland State, and then you had New Mexico defeating Houston Baptist, Air Force over Lafayette, Wyoming barely over Montana State, had to score late in the fourth quarter to defeat Montana State 19-16. He had a couple of losses. UNLV were home underdogs against Eastern Washington and then ended up losing in double overtime to the Eagles. Colorado State got kind of manhandled by South Dakota State, who went into Fort Collins and ran all over the Rams. That was a pretty interesting one. And then again, against the Pac-12, the Mountain West, I thought, showed very, very well. Nevada beat Cal in Berkeley, 22-17. Utah State goes up to the Palouse and defeats Washington State 26-23. We can get into that a little bit later as well, perhaps. Fresno gave Oregon a major scare before they ended up losing 31-24 against the nationally ranked Ducks up in Eugene. And then San Jose State, they lost 30-7 to USC in the Coliseum, but they were only down 13-7 midway through the third quarter in a game that, Starkville didn't even play that well, their quarterback, but they were still in the ballgame. I think a huge testament to Brent Brennan and the quality of that roster top to bottom. And so we're taking everything into account, this first full slate of games, at UCLA's win over LSU, we touched on earlier. Where do you it's early. We know that it is very early, but kind of taking a picture of the wider landscape and Hawaii, kind of how they fit into the Mountain West.
Yeah, I think, just from a national perspective, people look at the Mountain West differently now, especially with what's happening in kind of the big schools moving to the SEC, or at least their petition to move to the SEC. And now you get the group of 4 schools that are going to be attempting to move over to the the Big 12, and one of those, of course, is Boise State. Um, the the overall national, I would say, opinion of the Mountain West, I think, is higher than what it used to be, especially with definitely a school like Boise State, which we've known for a long time, operates like a Power Five school in the way they recruit, the way that their school treats their football program. It's top tier over there. Boise State knows how to do things, but then also the level of recruits that the Mountain West has sent to the NFL. I mean, even most recently, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, Josh Allen, we played against him at Wyoming. Not to mention Vander Esch, he played at Boise State. He's the middle linebacker for the Cowboys now. And then, of course, my former teammate, Jelani Tavai, was drafted in the second round. That old thinking of you need to go to a Power Five school to make it to the NFL, that myth is busted. It's just not the case. And not just make it to the NFL, but really thrive in the NFL. And so with that, and with how they're all playing right now against other schools, Mountain West is nothing to think lightly of, and especially as a former player of Nick Rolovich over at Washington State, to get bested at your home place by Utah State is not a good sign at all. It speaks to the level of talent that lies in the Mountain West, and Hawaii is definitely a big part of that. And if we could somehow position ourselves to be a contender for that Mountain West championship every year, I think nationally people would give us the respect we deserve.
Yeah, it's gonna be a tough West Division, no doubt about it, right? We
Yeah.
talked about Nevada's win at Cal, San Jose State, the defending conference champ. We know they're going to be really good again, and then what
Fresno.
Fresno has done their first couple of games, the blowout of UConn, and then going up and giving Oregon that scare. So no doubt about it, it's going to be tough sledding for the University of Hawaii, but a chance to lay down another marker for the Mountain West with their trip this weekend to Corvallis. All right, we'll kind of transition out of the business end, if you will, and get into a segment we like to call overtime. And this will kind of be our potpourri of thoughts. It'll be sometimes random, it'll sometimes be related, but just a little way for us, Hunter and I, to get in some extra thoughts that we have kind of swirling around the dome, and maybe didn't get a chance to tie it into some of the main topics throughout the podcast. So I'll kind of get us going, Hunter. I just wanted to make a quick mention before we close out episode 2 here on Hawaii Football Now. The Hawaii Circle of Honor 2021 inductees will be inducted, was announced a couple of weeks ago, but they will be enshrined during homecoming weekend, start of next month, October 1st, 2nd is homecoming weekend, and a lot of ties to the University of Hawaii football program, right? Colt Brennan, as big a rock star as that program has produced, and we know the impact that he left and continues to leave on the University of Hawaii program. Robert Kekaula, longtime broadcaster associated with that program on the radio here on ESPN Honolulu for a number of years as the color analyst, and then as the play-by-play man, for Spectrum's TV broadcast, OC Sports prior to that, for better part of a decade, and a guy that meant a lot to us in the broadcasting realm, and gone too soon, like Colton. And Ed Wong, the founder of Nakua, who we all know the importance of that organization in supporting the program. And then Amber Kaufman, shout out to her, one of the greatest athletes in University of Hawaii history, 2-sport standout, All-American in volleyball, and a high jump NCAA champion. Like it doesn't get much better than that. And she will go in with that quartet come next month. So just wanted to give a little bit. That's my little tidbit here in the overtime segment. But what do you got for us, Hunter?
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. I got to tip my cap to Big Rob. From the time whenever I was a walk-on, Rob always showed mad aloha to me, a haole boy from the mainland. That there'd be no reason for a man of his greatness and stature to pay any attention to a backup quarterback from Lake Zurich, Illinois. But Rob was always a stand-up guy. We always could have real conversations, and yeah, really going to miss that guy. He was always something I really look forward to, even after being a player, going to practice and chopping it up with him, because it was always a good time. So to see Rob DeMello down there with that old Rob Kekaula Aloha shirt on the sideline was pretty special this past weekend. But a couple things from around college football I really thought was impressive. First and foremost, my boy Mackenzie Milton coming in.
Unbelievable.
Late in the game for Florida State against Notre Dame and almost mounting a comeback for those boys. Fantastic. It literally coming off of a Joe Theismann-esque knee injury. The fact that he can even strap it up again is a miracle. And then on top of that, to almost mount a comeback, it's unbelievable. I think that he gave those coaches a lot to think about in terms of who's the starter on that team, and also who brings more attention to that program, because it's just a good story. We want to see him succeed, even if you're not connected to Hawaii, which of course all of us are. The Heisman front runner right now, in my opinion, is definitely Bryce Love out of Alabama. I thought he played unbelievable, and I don't know who's going to be Alabama. They're scary. Yeah, and kind of wrapping it up with what we were talking about earlier, the way that Alabama conducted themselves, they always impress me with their level of professionalism. It's not just that they can bring the top tier talent, which they can. There's a code amongst that team that no matter who's out there, who's playing, there's never an over exuberant amount of celebration. They play as a unit. They are strictly business there, and there's no reason why they wouldn't be a contender for a championship again. And if I'm a player at Hawaii, I look at them, and of course they're Alabama and we're Hawaii, but there might be some things that we could learn from. There might be some things that we could adapt in the way that we carry ourselves, the way we go about our business, that we could improve upon as a program. So that's my overtime, Jordan. I can't wait for college football week 2.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Right. First full weekend of college football really since 2019 in the true sense. Yeah. Let the pundits are already talking, right? Alabama's last 3 starting quarterbacks are all starting in week 1 of the NFL season, but it's like, is Bryce Brown the best quarterback that Alabama has had in the Saban era? Like it is, let the hyperbole begin. He was really good, by the way, against Miami. I 100% agree there. Hunter, this has been a lot of fun. I am looking forward to this Oregon State game this weekend. But looking forward more to next week when I get to chop it up with you and break down what we hope is a victory over the Beavers. I kind of like Hawaii's chances here to make that a pretty competitive game, even though they are a double-digit underdog. So have a great rest of your week, man. We'll do it again next week.
Right on. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. This has been Hawai'i Football Now.
You've been listening to Hawai'i Football Now with Jordan Helly and Hunter Hughes, all from ESPN Honolulu.